Hey, welcome back to the Omer Q Show. As always, I'm your host, Omer Qureshi, and we've got a wonderful show planned for you today. Democracy activist and the president of the group Open Primaries, John Opdycke, will be joining the show. We'll be discussing the need for electoral reform in the United States, the effect that statewide initiatives such as those in Maine and Alaska can have on an election, and the work that Open Primaries is currently doing. We're also going to be discussing the importance for intersectionality and coalition building in politics to bring about change, and why we can all get behind political reforms such as ranked choice voting, opening up primaries, and getting big money out of politics. All this and more coming up on the Omer Q Show. But before we get to that, please be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new episode is released if you're on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave a 5-star review. Without further ado, let's get to the interview. Welcome back to the Omer Q Show. Joining me at this time, he is a political reform activist and the president of Open Primaries, John Opdycke. John, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Omer. Great to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, and I've been looking forward to this for a little bit. I've, always appreciated the work that Open Primaries has done, and I can't wait to learn more about it. But before we talk about kind of the work that Open Primaries have done, I want to talk about kind of, how you got involved with the whole democracy or political reform movement. And, because it really interests me what motivates people. Like, what has motivated you to be a part of this movement?
Well, it's interesting. I wanted to learn about American politics as a way to become more worldly. I grew up in a pretty sheltered environment, very apolitical family. I went away to college. I didn't know anything about how the world worked, and I joined the Young Democrats and the Young Republicans my freshman year of college without knowing that you couldn't do that, and basically got kicked out of both. And I realized I was an independent and that I didn't want to have a tribal allegiance. And I got very involved in reform politics and third party politics. And this is 30 years ago when there was the whole Ross Perot phenomenon and a serious mainstream effort to create a third party that was mainstream. Mm-hmm. And I was part of that effort. And was part of efforts to change U.S. election laws back in the late 80s, early 90s that, would make them more third-party friendly. But really, to your question, my motivation was that I had a lot of friends from other countries, from Chile, from Haiti, from Jamaica. I played soccer growing up, and I realized I did not know anything about how the world worked. How is it that our government was supporting, overthrowing presidents in other countries? Why were we doing that? I was very naive, very unworldly, and I wanted to me, being an independent and being a democracy activist was really connected to my desire to become more worldly and connected to making the world a better place.
Yeah. And I think like my own like motivations for, being involved in, like this greater movement are similar in that, I kind of, you see people who don't live in the United States and you see that they have, multiple parties, like in Europe, for example. Like you go anywhere in Europe, they have at least like 4 or 5 prominent parties that really dictate how the entire political conversation is oriented and done. But here it seems like you're only able to really be a part of 2 sides in a discourse. And even if you don't fit into, a box, you're kind of forced to. Like, for example, like I'm probably way more progressive than a lot of people, but do I say that I fit, into a box of the Democratic Party? No. And do I say I fit into a box of the Republican Party? No. And I think like you have a lot of people, especially at this time, kind of coming to that realization, no matter what their views are, they're coming to that realization that, man, I don't think that this is how it's supposed to work, the process, the political process, and we need something better. So I'm glad that to hear like that kind of motivated you as well, like the more international approach to things. Also tell us about how Open Primaries came to be. and a little bit about the organization.
Sure. So we started in 2014. This was a time 7 years ago when the issue of reforming the primaries was not really that mainstream. It was considered a fringe topic. I created it as a way to kind of put a spotlight on the need to restructure the primary system for two important reasons. One, the growth of independent voters. I mean, it's the fastest growing segment of the electorate. 50% of young people are identifying or registering to vote as independents. And
Mm.
yet many states bar their participation in the only election that matters, which is the primary. And the other reason, in addition to the fairness argument, hey, we should have elections that allow everybody to vote, is that it was important to put a spotlight on the fact that politicians that get elected in these closed party primaries are not very good politicians. They end up catering to very, very small groups of people. They're unwilling or unable to do anything resembling innovation. All they do is just kind of parrot the party line. And I really believe we're at a moment in American history that if we don't incentivize in participation and involvement, as well as innovation and novelty, that we have real trouble as a country. I think we're seeing that already in so many different policy arenas. So I started it in 2014. I was hoping that we could make it a mainstream issue in 20 years. And here we are 7 years later, and there's a real growing recognition that the primaries are a leading contributor to some of what ails us in American politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that and that's kind of why I wanted to have you on, because you hear a lot about, electoral reform. You hear about, ranked choice voting being brought up by a lot of people. Open primaries, though, is something you don't really hear about, especially in the even in like the realm of electoral reform. And I think there should be more of a focus on that, because from my own experiences, in case anyone can't tell from the video version, I live in Maryland. In Maryland, we have closed primaries, and
Right.
if you're an independent or not part of a political party, if there's a candidate potentially on the other side of the aisle that you want to vote for in the primary, you can't do that. And I know that personally that there are a lot of people that I know that are affected directly by that, because they find the whole process of, hey, I need to now re-register my party status, and which it's a real, it's almost an obstacle, and sometimes I think it's an intentional obstacle put in the way, so to make sure certain people don't come in and vote for that part of the primary. um would you kind of agree with that assessment? I think of sometimes it can be a intentional hurdle.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not a conspiracy. You don't have to be a
Right. Right.
conspiracy theory to say that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are participating in engineering an electoral system that, frankly, keeps the American people only as, in some ways, we're the consumers. We're not the
Mm.
co-creators. The parties say basically, look, you have one job only. On election day, come out and vote for the candidates that we've selected, we've groomed, we've given them the issues we want to talk about. Everything's taken care of. You just need to come out and vote. And I think that's a cynical and undevelopmental understanding of democracy. Democracy is not just what you do on election day. Democracy is your capacity as a citizen to work with your neighbors and your fellow citizens and residents to create new directions for your city, state, and country. So it is intentional, but that's not a conspiracy. That's in some ways, the natural incentives of party politics. I mean, if
Yeah.
politicians could get elected with nobody voting, that would be their ideal scenario.
Yeah.
It'd be much easier for them.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that that's very true, because a lot of times when you bring up things like this, the whole argument of, oh, so now you think it's a huge conspiracy that, oh,
No.
that neither party wants like other people to vote. No, it's just the structures of power and the structures of the system that are in play. if it wasn't this, like you said, it'd probably be something else. It'd probably be, okay, maybe the party picks the nominee in the general, like through a convention, like kind of like the way it used to be, and I think that a lot of times those talking points, they're very easy for people who don't or are not incentivized to have things like open primaries or electoral reform put in place. It's an easy thing for them to say that, oh well, these people are just nuts and whatever, and I've heard it too. I've canvassed for politicians who have advocated for electoral reform. I've done volunteer work for that as well. And one thing that I always know, you either get told one or two things. One, well, that's just not the way it works and you're crazy. Or two,
Right.
you're going to be hurting, X party, right? Like
Right.
those are the two big talking points you hear. And I think you did a pretty good job of kind of dispelling the first one. But, what do you kind of say to someone who says that? Who says that, well, by doing this, you are hurting my political party that I believe in?
I mean, if you think that allowing everybody to vote is going to hurt your party, well, I then hope it gets hurt because it doesn't deserve to be insulated from that. I mean, come on. America is many things, good and bad. But one of the things that we are is a society that values competition and devalues monopolies and moats.
Mm,
And we've proven time and time again, whether it's in the economic sphere, whether it's in Jim Crow, whether it's in these things where you protect a group of people from social economic progress, you segregate people, you create these artificial monopolies. That is not good. It's not developmental. It's not growthful. So the parties, I mean, here's a great example. The parties have gone all the way to the Supreme Court to say, we are private organizations. Think of us like the Rotary Club or the Elks Club. We're private organizations. Why shouldn't we get to limit who votes in our primaries? You wouldn't want Rotarians voting in the Elks Club elections, would you? So they say that. And then they want we, the taxpayers, to fund those primaries.
yeah.
They basically say we're private, but we want the boards of elections to administer these elections. We want the taxpayers to fund them. We want all these privileges. That's where the parties are right now. They want to be private when it suits them, and they want public funding when it suits them. That's not good. That's monopolization. And it's one of the reasons so many people are independent is because they realize that the parties, sure, they have their platforms. Here's what we stand for. But they're also businesses. They're also in the business of winning elections and staying in power. And oftentimes staying in power and moving the country forward are not the same thing. In fact, I would say most of the time, they're not the same thing. So good. If you think that open primaries is going to hurt your party, say that out loud. Let other people hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's almost as if someone is telling you, it's like someone's telling you just not to do something that's good for everybody. It makes very little sense to me. And I kind of want to move over and talk about, I think, more so intersectionality and how that kind of plays into this, because I think it plays a huge part
Yeah.
into how we can work together to actually build a stronger democracy. It was just a very small anecdote. In 2018, I actually worked for Neil Simon, who was running as an independent in Maryland in the
I just
2018
spoke to
Senate.
Neil this morning.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Hope
Yeah.
he's doing well. Um, so I had the opportunity to work on that campaign, and a lot of times, even today, people still ask me like, "So yeah, you're like a progressive. Why did you work on this campaign, or what made you want to do that?" And I'm very honest about it. They asked me like, I'm very honest about it. I always say that there were some things that I agreed with the campaign on. There were other things that I didn't agree with the campaign on. But the thing that really drove me to working on there were a lot of the reforms that campaign put forward. Electoral reforms, democracy reforms, the advocating for open primaries. These are things you do not hear talked about in a normal election by
Right.
partisan campaigns. And the fact that I could go do that and be and still to this day, I don't disagree with my decision at all. I loved my time there, and I think it actually brought those issues to the forefront and made some more people aware of it than otherwise would
Absolutely.
have been. And that's what's so
Absolutely.
important. And the office we worked in as well, it was so diverse. You had libertarians, you had me, like progressives, you had regular Republicans. It was almost like we were building our own coalition,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's kind of what I want to bleed into this next question. Like, how important is that coalition building aspect, that the intersectionality of trying to get these reforms efforts off the ground?
It's not only important, it is the absolute most important thing.
Mm,
And I'll say this, I think that all of us have been taught that ideology is the most important thing in understanding ourselves, our neighbors, our fellow citizens, our country. That ideology, where you stand on the political spectrum, left, right, is the framework, the lens. It's not. I really think we have to go on a crusade to dismantle this ideological lens, because Americans have opinions. You just said, I'm a progressive. I have these progressive opinions. But Americans are also interested in creating things with people that don't share the same opinion. And when you use an ideological lens, you're like, well, that's crazy. I'm a Bernie supporter. I can only talk to and work with people that are in my little echo chamber. That's ridiculous. Bringing together people who have all kinds of different opinions to create new forms of political life is the whole name of the game right now. It's the whole name of the game. Because the Democrats and Republicans, they are so skilled at pushing people into these ideological echo chambers. And if we stay in those echo chambers, we have no power. When we get out of them and we come together, I think we have a lot of power. And I actually think that's one of the reasons, again, not a conspiracy theorist here. I think it's one of the reasons so much energy is spent on trying to convince us that our personal ideology is so important when it's not.
I do, yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think there tends to be more of an emphasis. There's definitely is more of an emphasis on just left right ideology. And is someone who kind of views politics differently. I think there's level, like, people want to say there's the axis, like the political axis. Like, no, this is like a 4 or 5D axis. There's so many different levels to understanding what makes someone a whatever they believe in, what really leads to someone having the values they have. And I think a lot of times we don't take into account their people's backgrounds. We don't take into account things that might have motivated them to believe what they believe. And that comes to the question of like dialogue and why
Right.
that's important in our society, because that's something we're seeing diminished on both sides of the aisle. You can see, like, it's almost like we're all going to our corners and we're not talking to each other. And it's weird because, as someone who's on the more progressive side of things, I'm also noticing that within like the leftist movement, you're seeing people, be more tribal. And I think it's something that's happened. That I think it's one, like, a almost like a primitive thing that we're going back to, of tribalism. And what pains me about it is that you're seeing friendships, you're seeing relationships destroyed, sometimes over pretty petty differences. I just want to get your thoughts on that and just the importance of dialogue, no matter what.
Well, I would take it a step further beyond dialogue,
Hmm.
because dialogue is in some ways, I think, now I don't mean to pick a fight with you, Omer, but I think dialogue is premised on you hold on to your beliefs, I'll hold on to my beliefs, and we'll just talk to each other. I think there's limitations to that, because in some ways it's a conflict model. I prefer creation. What can we
Okay.
create together? If we come together and say, okay, you've got your opinions, I've got my opinions, frankly, that's not that important. What's important is, can we create something new together? Can we create a new, you know, understanding, a new conversation, a new piece of legislation, a new event, whatever, a new group, a new book club? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that when you do that, when your basis is not dialogue but creation, I think what you'll see, and I've experienced this as someone who's been part of many kind of creative efforts that bring people together from all over the political spectrum, is that those differences are just not that important. They're really not. They're really
Yeah.
not. And it doesn't mean you have to abandon who you are and what you believe in. They're just not that important.
Yeah, and I was speaking last week. I had Alex Kack on, who's like a big political activist in Arizona, and he we were talking about that. We were talking about community and how it's
Yeah.
almost as if we're losing a sense of community with everyone around us, and and a lot of it is motivated by politics, and sometimes politicians and the way things are, and I think we were talking about how, like, sometimes, whether it's for better or worse, we're all kind of in this together, so we need to find a way, as best we can, to kind of move things along and kind of come together. It doesn't necessarily need to be behind legislation, like you said. Sometimes it can be as very simple as, starting a community book club, or things like that, things that are tangible at the like lower level, things that citizens are capable of doing. And I think we're losing, like, that aspect of it, because sometimes holding on to those differences in politics, we can argue whether or not that's important for, like, elected officials to do. But I think, for citizens, definitely it is so important for us to just kind of, and I don't even want to say leave things like alone sometimes, but just try our best to forget about these petty differences and try to live together, because at the end of the day, your neighbor is not going to change unless they move for whatever reason. Like, whoever you're living around, that's not going to change. You kind of have to make, almost your bed with it, and you can make it better. That's the thing that I think people don't understand. If you engage with people, if you start doing activities with people, a lot of times, like, you go to a locker room, if you're an athlete, a lot of your differences sometimes end up going out the window, because you're kind of motivated and you're doing something together as a team and in
Exactly.
collective action. And that's what I think we're losing, or maybe we never had it too much to begin with. Maybe that's just a pipe dream I had when I was younger. But
See, maybe I wouldn't say we're losing it because all the examples you just gave, teams, neighborhoods, people have this experience of building and creating things with people that they have different opinions and viewpoints. I mean,
mm,
sports teams are the kind of classic example. We do that all day long. We're not losing that capacity. I think what's important to understand is that the political arena, we are constantly told that you're not allowed to bring those team building skills into the political arena. You
mm,
have to leave those at the door. We're told that. It's not that we're losing this capacity. We're set, the political business in our country says this is not about creating together, this is about fighting. So I think we we have to, as a people, get smarter and say, the rules that you've established for how we do politics in this country are really problematic. I'd much rather have the rules be rules that allow people to navigate their differences instead of pimping out their differences and taking advantage of our differences. But we're going to have to do that. We, the people, are going to have to stand up and say, we want a new set of rules for how we're going to do politics together. And we have to create that.
and this is a very loaded question. Answer it however you may. But how do we do that? How do we get to that point where where people can get smarter, where people can create a better democracy and a better community?
I mean, we've been doing it since we kicked King George out. We've been kind of walking through the wilderness without a map, trying to figure out the answer to that question. How do you create a more perfect democracy? There's no roadmap. There's no thing. I think actually in our country's short history, we have both an original sin, slavery. We have unbelievable hypocrisy. We have the denial of rights for decades, but we also have an unbelievable commitment to expanding participation and expanding. Those things are side by side. That abject original sin and a culture of democracy innovation. We have both. So I think, when you talk about Neil Simon's campaign, a campaign that didn't win, he didn't get elected, but for you and for thousands of other people, it was an experience of seeing things in a different way, of seeing, oh, I can work with people that are Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, Democrats. I can work with people. Oh, and now you're doing this podcast. And I think that it's simply the activity of communicating and building and dialoguing and involving more and more people in a conversation about we have to create new rules. These rules are killing us. They're literally killing us.
Yeah,
And we have the tools. You should be telling that sports story, the locker room story. People know how to work with people they disagree with. We do it all day long. We don't even think about disagreements when it comes to putting a soccer team on the field or a football team
and
So we know how to do this. We just have to do it.
and I think it becomes a lot easier when you kind of have that end goal, like, or a goal in mind. I think that's when it becomes a lot easier because you look at a sports team or you look at the campaign, Neil Simon's campaign. We were working towards an end goal. A sports team, their end goal is trying to win. Our end goal
Right.
was trying to, do as best we can to win that election. And and that's what I've noticed, because like you said, dialogue can only go so far, but when you put things in action and you're working towards a goal, that's when it becomes, I think, a lot easier because because that goal in mind kind of becomes the most important thing. Like you forget about the fact that okay, Jim over here is a Democrat, and I don't agree with them on everything. Because I think when you don't when there's like when the focus is specifically on that, it's very very easy to get trapped into the thought of, oh, look at all our disagreements instead of, all right, we need to do X, Y, and Z to get ranked choice voting passed in a state or what have you. And I think you know what I've liked a lot from the movement as a whole and all these different groups, whether it be Open Primaries, Unite America is another group that does a lot of good work. Uh, what I've liked is there a lot of times you guys are willing to call out when something is very good and and call out when something is very bad and kind of be that voice that it's kind of like echoing the goals. I want to say I'm doing a bad job of explaining what I'm thinking, but I think you know what I mean. Like you guys have kind of set the goals and you're trying to like get those goals out there. And my other question is, how do you think if you had to kind of grade yourself and the work you've done with Open Primaries, how good of a job do you think you've done given today's current political climate at getting those ideas and those goals out there?
Well, I give us a plus on getting the ideas out there and a
Mm-hmm.
D minus. It's like SATs, 870 math, 430 English. Okay.
Yeah.
And let me tell you what I mean. I think that the democracy movement has done a great job of articulating a set of disruptions to the primary system, to the gerrymandering system, to the first past the post system, to the rules in Congress, to a whole set of structural reforms that would improve our democracy dramatically. I think we've done a great job at that. I think of people like Catherine Gale and Michael Porter, who wrote a book about the whole political industry, and that's getting out there, and others, and very good job. I feel like I'm a very tiny part of that process. Where I think we've not done a good job is that the process of transformation is not simply one of getting good ideas out there.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process of listening as well as getting good ideas out there. And I think that we have not done a good enough job of actually listening to the American people. And now this is understandable. Political reform has been so marginal that we've been yelling at the top of our lungs, listen to us, listen to us. We have ideas about how to fix the system. And finally, some people are listening. We're getting on CNN, we're getting pieces in Time magazine, and we're getting Andrew Yang talking about political reform. These are big things. But we have to pivot now, and we have to become better listeners, even as we continue to say we have good ideas, we have ways to fix the system. Because here's the thing, I genuinely believe this, is that if we're going to succeed at reforming American politics, it needs to involve the full, enthusiastic participation of the American people. We can't just pass a few laws and changes. We have to mobilize society the way the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, they changed society. They didn't just pass a few laws. They changed how we think about equality. And in order to mobilize the enthusiastic participation of the American people, we have to do a better job of listening to them.
You really spoke to one of the main reasons that I've kind of been so active and supportive of a lot of reforms like ranked choice voting, open primaries, and etc. I feel like we are at a point where a lot of people, and the real thing that motivated me was to see how many young people were just disenfranchised, dissatisfied with the political process, status quo, whatever it may be. And that really, like, for me as a young person who's like very active in politics, it scares me because you're having an entire generation that is thinking that politics just doesn't work for me and it never will. And once that idea gets planted in you at a young age, like, I know, like, I have my moments where I'm very cynical. um and
Yeah.
but once that idea is planted at a young age, it almost becomes embedded in the culture moving forward, and that's kind of scares me because then you won't have people coming out to vote. You won't have people feeling like they need to get involved. And what can you kind of speak to that? Like, kind of speak to that a little bit. I'm curious what you make of, we've seen it in polling, we've seen it in, how young people generally feel about politics. What do you make of young people just and that the fat feeling of being dissatisfied with the political climate?
They're right.
Simple as
They're
that.
100% right. Politics doesn't work. That's in some ways though, we have to get out of, my job is to try to convince you to get out and vote. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's not.
Yeah.
I'm amazed as many people vote as they do. I think voter turnout should probably be about 10%. If people were actually being rational about the relationship between their vote and what they accomplish, it should be about 10%. I think people vote actually more because they feel like it's a duty. They feel like it's a civic obligation, and that's good and that's positive. But come on, what's the relationship between using your vote and getting what you want? Mm-hmm. It's almost non-existent. So stop trying to convince people to vote because it's their duty, and say to them, hey, look, you're not alone and you're not crazy. The reason you think politics is a joke is because it is. So let's change it. Let's do something new together. And I think people will hear that message. We did a campaign in Florida for Open Primaries back in 2020, and we spent a lot of energy connecting with young people. We built a whole committee of high schoolers called Students for Open Primaries, which has kind of morphed into a national organization, precisely by saying, hey, you're inheriting a system that is flawed, that is broken, that doesn't work, that doesn't give people a voice, and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Not trying to convince people to vote in a broken down old system.
Yeah, and I think young that's a message how like because a lot of young people especially they realize there's a problem, but you see a lot of people telling them, oh well, the problem isn't with the way things are, it's with the people in charge. And again, that goes back to the idea of, or like, that person specifically in charge who doesn't agree with what I believe in, so you should vote for me. And and I think once you call out the hypocrisy of the system, that's when you're going to see a lot of, especially young people, resonate with the message more. And that's one thing that I've actually seen quite a bit of it. That I do wish though we could see more of, and then like that would be like one of my critiques. I'm sure like that's something that like you guys are doing, and it's just like as a whole, I feel like there probably needs to be more of an emphasis specifically on young people, because I think the same like anger, almost the same frustrations about the political system for young people are there. Uh, you know, so I think that would be a great way to move forward. And I know we're running a little bit on time. And again, thank you again for joining. I just have two last questions for you.
Sure.
Um, First, kind of switching gears a little bit. In your Twitter bio, it says you are a musical improviser. What does that mean? Improviser,
Improviser. Yeah, yeah.
improviser.
I do improv.
Yeah,
As a
really.
performer and a director, I've been in a couple different troupes, doing musical improv at the Castillo Theater and other theaters throughout New York City. And I've even done some freestyle rap improv with the Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, which is on Broadway right now.
Love freestyle, love supreme.
Yeah, they have a school, and I've done some
Yeah,
of their classes. And I find improvisation a very it's fun. It's a way to build things with people. It trains you to be a better listener, and it's therapeutic. So that's something I try to take a couple classes a year and perform when I can. Though COVID had obviously a huge impact on the improv community
yeah, I
because all the
know.
theaters were shut down.
Yeah, I bet. I
So that's just starting to open up again. But I love improv.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm also a big fan of like performative improv. Like, uh, but yeah, I was just curious about that because I saw that and I thought it would be interesting to talk about for a little bit. My last question before I let you go. What would you say if someone was in front of you right now? What would you say to someone who feels dissatisfied, disenfranchised by the way our political system works? What advice would you give them? What would you say to them directly?
I'd say we need you. We need your voice. We need your involvement. This American democracy is an experiment. It might fail, and it's up to us. If we want to keep it going, we've got to build it and not just rely on the fact that it's been around for 200 years to think that it'll be around for another 200 years. And I would encourage them to create a local democracy club and get 5 of their friends and neighbors involved and start educating themselves and involving themselves in efforts and activities to recreate our political system.
Maybe they could do improv. Who knows? um,
Well, they are doing improv by doing that. Trust me.
yeah, yeah, I bet
Yeah.
totally. John Opdycke, it has been a pleasure talking to you. Do you have anything you want to plug or anything you want or any message you want to say before we get out of here?
Now, great talking with you. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at JB Opdyke. You can also follow Open Primaries USA on Twitter. Go to our website, Open Primaries. We got a lot of stuff going on in 2022. We have lawsuits. We're playing defense. We have legislative campaigns, ballot measures. different committees and activities. We're going to start pressuring the Democrats and Republicans to open up their presidential primaries in 2024 in all 50 states. So get involved, get connected to us. If you want to help on this issue, there's lots of ways to get involved.
Great message. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks, Omer.
So that was my conversation with John Opdycke. I really want to thank him for coming on the show and sharing his thoughts about open primaries, because it's a topic you don't really hear talked about too much. You hear a little bit about electoral reform and voter reform in terms of things like H.R. 1, but you don't really hear about the specifics of what some of these reforms can do. And open primaries is one that, a lot of people don't know too much about. And I want to thank him for coming on and really telling us why these things specifically matter. If you want to follow John on social media, please go do that to stay up to date on all the work that him and Open Primaries are doing. Also, if you want to follow me on social media, you can do that on Twitter at OmerQ Show. Again, at OMERQ Show. You can also go and find us on Facebook, Patreon, and all that jazz. And again, if you haven't already, please hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you're on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please, please, please be sure to leave a 5-star review. Until next time.